Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our webinar is going to begin. Please welcome to this webinar. I'm Steve Love, President and CEO of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council. And again, we're delighted that we're going to have an educational webinar today, and it's hosted in coordination with NextGate. NextGate is an associate member here at the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council. Today's topic is patient matching, comparing value and performance for the healthcare enterprise. We're delighted that we have an expert speaker, and he's going to discuss some innovative solutions to decrease duplication of patient records. This is an issue, as all of you know, that can cost hospitals as much as $1.5 million a year. This information technology problem not only negatively impacts the bottom line, but can lead to medical errors, skewed reporting with analytics, redundant medical testing, administrative waste, and it certainly can impact and have poor satisfaction patient scores. This is a fascinating topic, and it is a continuation of the trend here at the Hospital Council, where we're providing education in some of the very latest developments in healthcare. Our speaker today is Mr. David Bennett. He's a Southwest Regional Vice President of NextGate. A former Chief Information Officer, David has worked and been with NextGate for over 7 years. He works and enables health systems, payers, specialty providers, and others to realize their potential related to care quality measures, patient safety, and reduced cost through the elimination of patient duplication and cross-system record linking. NextGate's platform currently manages over 250 million patients in the U.S. across a broad spectrum of healthcare market segments. We're delighted that David's going to do his presentation now, and so it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. David Bennett.
Great. Hey, Steve, thank you for the very gracious introduction there. That was very kind of you. So, good. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here with you guys today. I hope you find this a fun presentation or get some good insight out of it at least. And I look forward to answering questions at the end of this deck we're going to run through here today. So real quick, why don't I just jump into it? We're going to talk about patient identity management today. Let me get this deck right. There we go. And from a brief agenda perspective, let's chat a little bit about the state of patient identity matching today. The unfortunate realities of it, why it is what it is today for all of us. No matter if you're a small, medium, or large health system, an HIE, an ACO, a RIO, if there's any of those left out there, or running analytics, et cetera. We'll chat a little bit about why patient matching is so hard, and where so many of the encapsulated EHRs somewhat fall short in addressing the issue. And then we'll go beyond that a little bit and talk about what is going on with the future of patient identity management, not only from an architectural perspective, which we'll touch on, how we're decoupling identity management from the innards, if you will, of our EMRs, our clinical and or financial systems, and treating them at a much more enterprise level architecturally. And then we'll also talk about some data augmentation. What is that also, AKA known as referential data, which is a pretty hot little buzzword right now in the industry. So we can work through that a little bit and talk about how it works, what it does well, what it doesn't do well. And then open it up for some questions after that. So, all right, having said that, let's take a look at the unfortunate reality. And Steve actually just read pieces of this for me, so I'll go the short version, which is this is a recent study out of the Black Book research company from 2018. And it's not atypical to anything that we've seen over the past maybe 15 years when it comes to the cost of patient duplication for a health system or hospital or any group. You dive into the details a little bit more from that study, and we see very, very quickly that even though we've made these tremendous headways over the years in moving off of paper and onto digital charts and the attempt to become interoperable and exchange data and share information, that and I should say additionally, as we continue to push towards value-based care models, which force us to be much more highly integrated and interoperable amongst one another, we haven't done a very, very good job of managing patient identities within these various systems. And a lot of those challenges are associated with some of the information out of this black box study. And, for instance, the average number of disparate systems within a hospital system that are responsible for interoperability is 17 now. 33% of all denied claims, which is a sore on all of our sides, is a resultant from inaccurate patient data. The costs associated with it are just tremendous from downstream reconciliation perspective, and not to mention the risk components. And an interesting number, which is a little higher than we actually see at NextGate, but 18% average duplication rate today in any given hospital/health system in those clinical systems. So that's a little bit scary. I mean, we tend to see 15%, which is also atrocious. But I can't imagine any other life-critical industry that we all work in accepting a 15 or an 18% error rate on the front end as being okay. It's a little scary. So the effects are obvious. I'm not going to beat that drum. You all understand them. The effects on patient safety, effects on your clinical initiatives, effects on care delivery and care outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. So there's other data here as well. I mean, there's some other studies out there from CHIME historically, and another larger study on identity crisis back from 2008. All this stuff is pretty consistent. And going back to my earlier point, that the CHIME study and also the one from Identity Crisis down there with the $8 billion on it, those numbers that are in those studies, and you guys can look them up, or I can provide you some access to those resources afterwards, they haven't changed much, and they're pretty close to what the Black Book folks found for 2018. So we're not doing a good job at improving there. So, all right. So we take a look at why it's difficult, or what's going on, and the challenge is that healthcare is changing, and we're all managing that. There's much more of an emphasis towards value-based care, data and exchange, interoperability. How do we extend this outside of the four walls that we're typically used to operating in today, into those post-acute care markets? Local HIEs or ACOs. Are we partnering with external analytics corporations or services that are not just providing claims analytics, but also clinical content analytics, which means we need to be able to connect these patients across the various information systems, et cetera. And it's really forcing us to do, to build much more interoperable solutions. Okay. And the continued unfortunate reality is the data's dirty. I mean, whether it's internal data from inconsistencies at our registration front desks, whether it's external entities, whether it be laboratories that we're taking data in from, we've got disparate outpatient systems, so we've got different systems, different content being entered, and also how do we trust these systems or not? Which ones are accurate? What's the volatility of this data? It's very disjointed in content for depending on where that data is coming from, right? So really, in essence, as we try to achieve this interoperability, we really don't always know who's telling us the truth when it comes to patient identity. Are they giving us the entire story, right? Or is the story changed and they're just behind, one iteration or two iterations? And all of this leads to very, very disjointed content at the patient level, okay? So now let's chat a little bit about, why and the EHRs today that we all deal with, and I'm not going to pick on anyone. They all have about the same results from our experience. Why they have a challenge with it, and then walk into a little bit about going beyond, where we see that decoupling of patient identity and moving it up to much more of an enterprise approach. So, okay. So why is it difficult? Because it's difficult. It's no longer what the industry originally started off with some pretty sophisticated, to be fair, string matching comparators within databases and some minor exclusionary lists, right, where we could, exclude all ones for social security number or all, one numeric sequence for dates of birth and these sorts of things, the shortcuts as I call them, right? And it's now morphed into a much more complex and comprehensive set of advanced techniques that include not only probabilistic but also deterministic algorithms that are able to address multi-part names, right? When somebody gets married and there's a hyphen in the name, and then they get divorced, and then maybe they remarry, right? All those things occur over time, and it's really still the same, carbon-based life form, the same human. But over those periods of time, we have to be able to track that, this was really the same person, right? And not dispute. We also have to deal with phonic error detection. We deal with dyslexic pattern recognition and adjacent key detection. We have pretty extensive synonyms dictionaries that we should take into consideration, right? We should also consider historic values such as, addresses and or phone numbers that do change on occasion, right? Those volatile data elements. But we have to be able to store that stuff and keep it, because we might get an old record that has an old address on it versus the current address, and just knowing that was a valid old address at a certain point is valuable data to make as a contributing element to the overall matching component. We need to come up with data standardization. We need to include exclusionary logic, which I mentioned earlier, and then also the ability to use external data resources. Some of that, which we'll talk in a little bit more detail in a little while, but referencing outside data sources to help us make decisions when we're kind of on the fence, right? Whether it's really the same patient or is it really a unique patient. And then, of course, there's got to be a whole lot of structure around data survivorship, right? Who do we trust? Who don't we trust? Who should be allowed to make a change to a record? Right. As a good example, reference labs, external reference labs are typically very dirty, and we never like to trust them. So we weight their survivorship routing rather low, right? And then, of course, we also want to include a lot of advanced functions like false positive detection. Those twins, right? We never want to link those twins together, even though they have very similar names. Jane and Jamie, same last name, same date of birth. Social security numbers are one number off from one another. They got the same address. They've got the same, parents in there, but they're really two different people. And in cases which we've actually run into, if one of the twins is ill and needs special care and the other one isn't, we need to make sure that we don't make those mistakes, right? And those are just a handful of some of the more advanced algorithmic components that we have to deal with in order to get these super high accurate matching rates. Then on top of that, we want to start to introduce more advanced functions around machine learning, right? How can the algorithms detect things that we may not know are going on in the background? And notify us. Don't make changes to algorithm tuning, but notify us as professionals, flag it so that we can take a look at it, and then at that point it's actionable and we can do smart things. So we start to incorporate all of that technology in, and you start to get into a pretty advanced stack of requirements to get to these ultra high matching rates, right? And this is difficult. It's not easy. And really where we see the EHR vendors kind of challenged, and it's not that they don't care, because they do. But this is a pretty heavy lift technology-wise for them to incorporate some of the functions that I just went over in that previous slide, right? It's a big, heavy lift. It requires a lot of R&D. It requires, focus in the continued evolution of identity matching, right? And really their focus, I should say, is much more around the clinical content and presentation of that content, workflow, reporting, all of the clinical side pieces that entity identity management companies like NextGate, that's not our bailiwick. We never want to do that. But it essentially limits our EHR friends to never being able to achieve those ultra low matching rates, because it's a pretty big lift of technology for them to manage. So as an example, I think I mentioned earlier, we typically see on average about a 15% patient duplication rate when we do frequency analysis on a given system's patient demographics. And then after we're done, we're actually able to get them down to about 2% as our current running rate. So 15 to 2, it's pretty impressive, and that's where we need to be as an industry, even more if we can. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we're trying to get to that place as well. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about going beyond patient matching. This is really where we see the future heading. Moving away from our large monolithic solutions, from our EHRs with multiple patient identity modules, both inpatient, outpatient. We've probably got radiology as well. We got path, we got lab. We're integrating with external entities, HIEs, et cetera. Right, and what we really need to do is decouple our patient identity module from these individual applications and move them up into an enterprise level. Right, make them essentially, for any of the technical folks that are on this call, move it up to the interface engine level, where it's a service that is available as a single resource to any and all applications that want to consume, and thereby allowing us to maintain a unified patient record across the entire enterprise. We call it a single best record, which takes essentially the contributing elements and the trusted best contributing elements from all the various systems that are touching that patient, if you will, and builds that single best record so it's the most accurate representation of that patient from a demographics perspective, right? And this is where we like to say we put the letter E in the EMPI, because now we're decoupling an MPI from a clinical application directly, moving it up into the enterprise level, and now exposing it as a service to all of those upstream and downstream clinical, financial, subsidiary applications that need to utilize it as a source of truth. This also allows us to keep everybody synchronized. So if you can support downstream messaging through the interface engines, which they do, right, obviously, and now when a change occurs, that we can notify all those downstream systems and keep them synchronized, thereby alleviating, creating silos, if you will, which we see in so many clinical systems today. All right. And I think... Yeah, so this approach, I think, in summary, is where we're seeing things move to. It makes sense when you consider that we're constantly going to be moving faster and faster towards much more interoperable environments external to what's in the four walls of our institutions. And this is where we really start to see patient identity management become a platform, right? A real platform, okay? As part of that platform, we obviously have to include some pretty important pieces, right? The matching engine obviously is that foundation we've been talking about. Those advanced algorithmic sets and inclusionary, exclusionary, those false positive traps, and et cetera, are all very, very important. But we also need to incorporate data governance. We need to make sure that these tools are plug and play interoperable, right? Leveraging standards that we all live and die by today. We also need to take a look at maybe addressing relationship management, patient to next of kin or to responsible party, or even patient to provider, going across registries. Right now you can build care teams. And also take a look at third-party data sources, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That's that augmented supplemental data stuff. So, but it builds out a core platform here at the enterprise. And from that core platform is where all of the applications that we see today, whether it be care coordination applications, predictive medicine, social determinants in health, integration into external analytics tools, et cetera, they all access this single point from an identity management perspective as the source of truth and leverage that intelligence, knowing that it's going to be providing consistent data and demographics across the entire enterprise. The loft there is what's next, right? It could be institutionally, it could be, who knows what's going to come out of Congress next for us to follow, et cetera. So, but again, the architecture supports, the ability to expose patient identity across the applications and not be limited to within. Okay. Data governance, these are standard tools, right? I'm going to just touch the tools real quick, which are, when we talk about the enterprise level, we've got to find a way to manage the identities, but also there's always a small ongoing battle around maintaining data quality, right? So we need tools to do that. We need a data stewardship tool. We need code set management. We need reports management, access management, as far as security tools, right? All these things are part of an enterprise product. It's also that single point of access, right? So we don't need to manage this level of identity cleanup and data stewardship in not only my clinical EMR on the inpatient side, but maybe on an outpatient side, maybe on a radiology system or a lab system. This is a single point to do that in, and then provide, again, that downstream notification to those consuming systems. So it's really one place that we're managing the patient as an entity, okay? Then on top of that, we need to do a lot with plug-and-play interoperability. We need to leverage our existing standards, love them or not, HL7, FHIR, of course, wonderful, right? There's still a lot of old X12 stuff out there. There's still CCDs feeding everywhere. The ability to manage, direct integration with databases, external databases, or, modern systems now supporting PICS and PDQ, which integrates very elegantly into existing patient registration workflows, which is very critical, and not changing what those people are doing on the front end at all. That's very important. Architecturally supporting the most common databases, very fast architectures, very scalable architectures, and exposing this as a service that we mentioned, or I mentioned earlier. Okay. So having said that, maybe I'll jump into a little bit about this topic, which has been getting quite a bit of buzz as of lately. Data augmentation. Which, includes this buzzword referential data. I'll use it too because it's a valid point or a valid phrase. But also locational data, right? Can we do location validation? Can we include geocoding? And other tools really to add value to this patient, this entity, right? And how can that help us? And I think everybody understands how address validation can help us there. But the geocoding from a marketing perspective or a trending perspective with social determinants is important because we can localize people, or at least where we think they live. So, okay. And when we talk about data augmentation, we talk about why. Why do we need to augment this stuff, right? And the reality is that, even with these advanced deterministic and probabilistic algorithms and all of this wonderful logic that I mentioned earlier in the deck here, we're still only able to get about 95% accuracy, even with tuning to a given specific patient population. Which is good. It's very good, but it's not good enough. So as we continually try to innovate and push forward, how do we get to that 97, 98, 99? Because there's always a stubborn small subset of data that cannot be automatically linked, or at least not safely, which is something we never want to do, right? And so what do we need to do to cross that chasm, right? So we need to, and with the understanding that 100% as being the benchmark is never achievable, and I'll touch base on why that is in a minute. But how do we, look at further optimizing algorithms or machine learning, which we talked about, but what else can we do to get to that higher matching rate above 95%? And what we find is that data augmentation actually provides us with some pretty advanced tools. We have access today, to third-party data sources. And this is an interesting topic because these third-party data sources are out there. Other industries have been using them for years. And what they are is these conglomerations of trial bureau credit data, local DMV data, right? Access to local public court information, even down as low level as hunting and fishing licenses, right? Real estate transactions. All that data is out there. And even though most of it is not allowed to be sent to us as a consuming entity, if you will. In other words, I never want to see financial data. I don't want to see the home loan data. I don't want to see court data. Because there's a whole lot of security issues there, and frankly, none of us want to store that. We have enough data to store, and it's not really pertinent to what we're doing. But what these data sources do allow us to do is send them record pairs, and they know a lot more about that patient than maybe we do in certain circumstances. And then they can send us confidence scores back, or even a confidence score plus what they believe is the current best address and phone number, normal demographic fields that we would store anyway in healthcare, and allow us to take that data and incorporate it into yet just another contributing element of this total algorithmic score that we're calculating. So I never want to overwrite my patient data with this tri-bureau data, with this augmented data, but I might want to take it into consideration as a contributing element. And really where we see value in this is not with every single pair of records that present to us. And instead, because we're already matching accurately 95% of the patients that come in and present to us, right? We could do that already. It's this small subset of records that didn't score low enough to be considered a unique patient, first time to our institution, but also didn't quite score high enough to link to an existing record. It's that very narrow gap in the middle there that we tend to phrase as a potential duplicate. Those potential duplicates are the ones that HIM professionals have to look at. They need to make we need a human to make that call. We do not want to create a false positive, right, and cause problems. So that narrow pool in the middle usually represents a very small percentage, usually about 4%, 3% of the record pairs down in there. And if we can use augmented data, excuse me, to help us resolve some subset of those automatically, and it's not a perfect science, so we don't get all of them done, but if we can get them to resolve a certain subset of them automatically, that's a tremendous reduction on our workforce staff, right, working those queues, if you will, looking at potential duplicates, doing that research, etc. So it's a big topic. On top of that, we're adding location intelligence, right, where we can actually go out and when we're presented with a patient address and actually verify that that's a deliverable address, right? These are done in some billing systems today, not in a lot, but to find out it's a valid United States Postal Service, address that we know if we sent them a bill, it's going to make it there is important. But even more so, the ability to add geocoding on top of that. So that now if we wanted to go in and mine our data sets from a patient location perspective, we can do such, right? That also helps us figure out if we're building patient portals that says, hey, my physician told me I need to go see an orthopedic surgeon, so I want to log into my patient portal. I want to do a search for a orthopedic surgeon who speaks Mandarin Chinese and takes my insurance and lives within 10 miles of my house, right? Those sorts of advanced searches are now possible from and that's just one example, from a quality of service delivery perspective. So just a neat idea there. So again, that's how we're trying to add additional data to add value, not only to improving the matching through third-party data, but also to adding location intelligence and validation from addresses, etc. So okay. So when we go back to reference data here, and I'll just stay focused on this, we did a lot of analysis. And what we found out was there's really three classes of data, or three quadrants. It wouldn't be quadrants, but trips that we run into. And the first is static data. That is, data that usually doesn't change, dates of birth and SSN4 and genders and first names at least, right? And where we see errors there is mainly because of poor data entry, just data quality. And reference data can help us determine those correct values, right? Volatile data, that's a big challenge, right? Where we've got large gaps in time between when a patient's come in historically and today, and they may have moved a couple of times and changed phone numbers a couple of times. And again, that's very much attributed to the data being stale. And augmented data can really help us there because that history is there. We'll walk through that in a minute. And disjointed data. These are our outside contributors that are sending us information. I'll use the example of a reference lab. Typically very dirty. I'm sure many of you are nodding your heads right now, where external labs provide you fragmented data, garbage data, partial data, non-consistent data, and really the ability to use reference data to fill in those gaps and then incorporate that into the matching algorithm helps us, leap over that hurdle very, very nicely. Okay. Here's an easy example, and I'm going to pop to the next one. This is right around volatile information, and here's a great example where Liz Smith lived on Fenwick with that phone number. Then she got married, and she was in the same house and phone number, and then her and her husband moved, and so they changed addresses and phone numbers. And then she changed numbers again, and then she got divorced, and then she got remarried. Right, and the EMPI, EMPI technology, as long as Liz in this example has been into our institution through maybe step 1 and then to step 3, we'll match her. It's when because we're storing that historic address data and phone number data, for example. So we're able to cover those gaps with the deterministic and probabilistic algorithms, but depending on the velocity of those changes, right, the EMPI, anyone's, can become, crippled. It really can. And what we see is on the right-hand side of this slide, because I kind of already covered the left, where Liz Smith came in at the very beginning, and then she was 2 marriages later. Liz Rogers was, 10 years later that she came back into the hospital. And that's not going to be a match because there is so much that has changed there. She would be considered a potential duplicate, even if we had some other data elements in here, like we had her SSN4 or maybe we had some phone history, right? So where we see those gaps in time is where we start to build those potential duplicates. And I want to go through that. Disjointed data as well. This is the lab example, so I won't spend too much time here. But you can see, I'm going to go back, where if we can utilize reference data to go back and they can actually rebuild that history there that you see, because it knows when Liz got married. It knows she changed houses and bought a new home. It knows that she changed phone numbers, and then it knows she got remarried. They see all of that information because they're tracking that historically, whether it be through court records, whether it be through DMV records, cell phone records, financial records for home loans, etc. They see that, and they're able to help us connect or cross that gap in time. Okay. Disjointed, I just touched on earlier. That's a great example of our friends in labs. So really, it's a big problem, right, where we see those broken data sets. So now maybe we talk a little bit about the facts and myths around reference data. And there's been a lot of noise in this space as of lately. It's kind of interesting. So let's just go through this. Facts. It's kind of fun, easy stuff. High quality reference data provides 5 out of 6 adults in America. That's great. That means 17% are not in that reference data set of adults, right? That's 18 and over. The interesting thing here as well is that children that are under the age of 17, which represents about 22% of the U.S. population right now, you're not allowed to use reference data on those people. Not only are you not allowed to legally, but most of them don't have any, because they haven't re-entered the credit market, if you will. They're probably not buying homes, getting married, getting divorces. Their phones are under their parents' accounts, etc. So there's really not a lot of data around them. And even if there is a smattering of it, probably your 17-year-olds, right? You'll see some of that. It's illegal to use it in not only all 50 states by federal, but there's a handful of individual laws that are even more rigid state-wise. So. And one thing that's also interesting is we found that reference data actually helps us, and I'll go into some more detail here in a minute, resolve about 40% of those potential duplicates, those ambiguous ones that I was mentioning, which are the ones that are hard for us to do automatically, which is that the 40%, those are the ones that the HIM folks now won't have to touch, which is a tremendous value add. Some of the myths, reference data is a silver bullet, right? It's not, and it never will be. As we were just talking about, 22% of the population are children, and they have no digital footprint, and 17% are not covered at all for various reasons, right? So that's 39% of the total population. So it's not really effective to say that's the silver bullet. And one I heard just recently, and I just put this on the slide for fun because it was a myth to me at first, which is the EMPI is dead, right? There's no need for it. You just use reference data. And that is just so fundamentally wrong, because we're never going to let reference data overwrite our clinical databases. It's never going to happen. We might let it contribute to an overall algorithm calculation. Is this really the same patient? Can you help us? But it's never going to become our source of truth that we basically hand over the keys to in our clinical databases. And secondly, it does not promote any interoperability, which is you need the workflow, you need the ability to incorporate survivorship with your external entities, you need to be able to handle downstream notification and keep all those other systems synchronized. So it does none of that. So the EMPI is dead is somewhat of a myth. And I go back to reference data being a wonderful contributor to an overall matching approach, a scheme, right, that you're using to assure accuracy, but it's by no means the end all. So we actually did a study, kind of fun. This is a very large live HIE in America. This study is done a couple of months ago. And we see this representation, the three colors. I hope you can see all three colors. But that light blue hash, which represents 95+% of this graph, is what the EMPI matched automatically with the deterministic and probabilistic algorithms. Right? It sorted all those patients out. And what we see up above at the top of the graph, that little gray band, those are the potential duplicates that fall into that little middle queue that I mentioned, right? That need somebody to look at them, to touch them. And the dark blue that's kind of in between them, that's the ones that referential matching were able to automatically reconcile. In other words, we sent those record pairs out, we got some information back from the reference data sets, and we reprocess our algorithm calculations based on that little bit of insight that they gave us, and therefore it was enough to push that patient either into nope, it's a unique patient, or yeah, this is a match to an existing patient, let's go ahead and create that linking. Okay, and when we dig down into that a little bit more, you can see, it's kind of interesting, The lighter blue is that total number of potential duplicates, and the dark blue is the actually the one that represents what percentage we were actually able to resolve of the lighter blue. And you can see on the left side there where you're at that 15 years of age and under, right, where the data just falls off, right? We don't have that stuff. We're not allowed to use it. It's interesting. There's a slight anomaly in there between the 15 and the 17. I'm going to have to ask somebody about that. There might be some rare case with a few children that I don't understand, but you can see where that just falls off. But we can also see from the fact that we're able to resolve only 40% of that, probably half of it are those children, that even the adults, right, there's not always enough reference data out there for us to make a hard determination between, yeah, this patient should be either linked to an existing patient or called unique. So we still need to leave that to a set of human eyes to make that decision. So I think this, in conjunction with machine learning and some continued evolution around the matching algorithm technology, is going to push us even further towards that quote unquote holy grail of 100%, which we can never achieve. We know that, but if we can get to 98.5, I mean, that's pretty good, and certainly worth pursuing. So, okay. I think I went through that deck a little faster than I thought today, so that's really all I have, and I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any.
David, we do have several that have come up here, so I'm going to ask you the first one here.
Yeah.
What do the other enterprise systems normally do with the enterprise ID that you provide them? Do they queue up patient merges for user review or what?
It's a great question. So depending on the system, what they will do is consume that enterprise ID and use it as an alternate patient ID. So you can do that through HL7. And then depending on the logic that's within that given information system, when they integrate with the EMPI as part of a registration event, then the registration system, whether it's a Cerner or an Epic or Meditech or whichever, what they'll actually do is spawn a query during a registration episode to the EMPI with that EUID and or with a local ID, and then we will respond back, and they will be able to then match that to the EUID that they already stored and verify that, yeah, we know this is really the same patient, and therefore, you know what, go ahead and choose them. So it's a validation of the registration process is one example.
Okay, I got another question here. If you discover data that tells you that two patients that were previously connected should not be connected, how do you communicate unmerges?
Oh, it's a great question. So there is an unmerge function. So if we detect that two patients were false positively linked, if you will, merged within a given system, we will flag that, and I'll give let me give two answers to this. We will flag that as an overlay. So if we get a registration message from a given clinical system that overlays an existing patient that we know is already in that system, we'll flag that as an overlay. We'll provide notification to the HIM team so that they can go in and fix that within that clinical information system. If we inadvertently link two patients to be the same, and they really should not within the EMPI, which doesn't happen too often at all, but if it did happen, then the data stewardship tool allows the HIM person to unlink those two records, and we will actually generate an HL7 unmerge message outbound for that.
Okay, I have another question here.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned value-based care. Can you restate how you see EMPI playing a role in that?
Oh, absolutely. So in value-based care, we're dealing with data exchange across multiple clinical systems. So, and we need to collect that data and be able to look at it holistically from a analytics perspective as well as a care quality or care delivery perspective. And if that data is coming from multiple external sources and/or we're exchanging it with multiple external sources, whether they be clinical or analytical or financial, frankly, in nature, we need to be able to find a means in which to crosswalk that patient's identity to and from those respective systems. All right, as well as look at him or her holistically and say, who is this patient, Dave Bennett? Where are all these records stored across the enterprise with these various medical record numbers? What are those various medical record numbers? What are those sources attributed to those medical record numbers so I know where to go get that data if I need it? And also from an analytics perspective, now the analytics tools are able to actually connect not just the financial information, but also the clinical content, because we're doing a lot more clinical analytics now. So if I'm an analytics tool and I'm consuming external clinical data from various entities that know Dave Bennett by 5 different medical record numbers, for example, I need to be able to connect those into a single entity so that I know that my analytics are representative of the entire clinical content or clinical record set for Dave Bennett as an entity, carbon-based life form. Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. Are you currently using AI or advanced analytics to help automate some of these processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're playing around with some AI stuff right now. It's too early to share much around that, just to be candid and honest. But it is something that we're experimenting with right now in our R&D labs to add that level of advanced functionality. So stay tuned to that. It's a hot topic. It really is.
Well, you're getting a lot of questions here. Here's another one. I noticed the study you mentioned earlier in the presentation made reference to a national average for duplicate patient records of 18%. The reports I'm getting from my EHR indicate that I'm running 5%. Is there an independent service that can validate what my EHR's reporting is telling me?
Yeah, that's a great one. We call it the fox watching the hen house, because the reporting tools are typically the same ones that are using, let me say that differently. The reporting tools are typically using the same matching algorithms that are matching the patients. So, and that's where we see the big discrepancies. There is a service, actually we do it, and we come in and take a data extract, just demographic data. I don't want any clinical content, but I want demographics. We'll process that through our algorithms up in our secure AWS environment, and then we produce an executive summary, which we share with the team, as well as a few handfuls of record pairs that we've identified as duplicates that the given clinical system did not identify as duplicates, so that the HIM folks can go do a little validation on their own. So that is a service that we do offer, and if anybody's interested in that in more detail, I don't want to turn this into a sales call because it's not. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll walk you through that and how we do it. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, I have another one here. Our health system has multiple copies of Epic on all different versions at various locations. Can the EMPI act as the patient source of truth for all of our Epic instances across the entire health system, regardless of which location a patient presents at?
Yes, that's a classic example. We're doing that with Epic at other locations across the country. One in particular, Geisinger Health, uses us for that exact purpose. And that we're able to not only provide a master ID across the entire health system, but we also store all of those independent Epic IDs for the respective locations and become essentially a entity source of truth for Epic to call upon when it needs to move records back and forth to between the systems, because now we're sort of a traffic cop / librarian where we know every identifier for that patient irregardless of which Epic instance that patient has data within. So yes.
Here's a good question. In light of the recent House ruling overturning the ban on a national patient identifier, NPID, will an NPID solve the patient matching problems in the U.S.?
That is a great question. Somebody's obviously watching the news or reading the Wall Street Journal. So it's an interesting topic. And the answer is it's undoubtedly going to help. There's no doubt about it. Having a single patient identifier is yet another contributing element. But it's not a silver bullet. And let me answer that in a little bit more detail, because we've seen other countries much smaller than ours do this. I'll give you, England, the UK, Scotland, where we have some direct experience with, where they've had, and let's just do England specifically. They've had the NHS number, which is their National Health System Identifier number. That's been in for probably 30 years or so, right? 25 years. And that is interesting because what we found is that the older clinical systems that are there don't support storing the NHS number. They also don't support querying the NHS service, which is a cloud-based service, if you will, where they can, validate and get the patient's ID from essentially an exposed electronic service. And so a lot of those clinical systems and financial systems, frankly, never were able to make the technological leap to support the use of that NHS number. On top of that, we see a tremendously or reasonably large number of patients within the UK that have multiple NHS numbers. And how that happens is a variety of ways. They say they lost their NHS number and they apply for a new one and they don't find the old one for some reason, so somebody at NHS is lazy and just assigns them a new one. There's some shared ones where people get them stolen, so then they recycle them. There's all kinds of rationale for that to happen. But at the end of the day, it's been in there for 25 plus years, I think it is, and they still are using. Actually, they're using NextGate's EMPI right now across NHS as it deploys. But they've got to figure out a way to not or to resolve those duplicates, and then on top of that, support integration with some of their social care systems, which are somewhat siloed and treated as a much more private and sensitive data. So there's that challenge there. I think here in the U.S., and again, I think it's a good thing. It's a very good thing that we have yet another data element. But if you think about it, it's probably going to be 10 years before we have standards developed, and probably another 10 years before the clinical and other systems today that we use will be able to support that new number and actually use it as a master data ID within their databases to link patients and for us to start collecting those NHS numbers, or not NHS, whatever the U.S. wants to call the number. So it's a good thing. It's a good contributing element that we would want to add into algorithm calculations, but it's not a magic answer like putting a chip in our animals like we do, which is probably the real answer, but it'll never happen in America anyway. So, and I say that tongue in cheek for fun. So.
Okay, here's another question. We're building out our cloud migration strategy, and it would be nice if an EMPI was offered as a cloud service. Is that something you're working toward?
Yeah, absolutely. It is supported infrastructure or architecture, both within NextGate. NextGate currently offers the EMPI as a SaaS service through our cloud partner right now, which is AWS, but we're also just wrapping up some work with Azure, so we'll support the Microsoft Cloud here very shortly as well. So yeah, it is for those who wish to reduce their data center footprint and the resources to keep that infrastructure up and running and managing software updates and patches and security auditing and penetration testing and all those wonderful things that come with a data center, and have actually begun that move to start moving clinical and financial systems up into the cloud. We are definitely there today. So yes.
Well, I don't see any more questions here, so David, on behalf of the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council and our President CEO, Steve Love, we'd like to thank you for this presentation today. It was fascinating stuff.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys all for joining me today. I hope you found it informative. Obviously, if there's anybody that has follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them. And again, thanks to the Dallas-Fort Worth Hospital Council. Great group. Love being a member. And I look forward to doing some more with everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.